Thanks everyone for coming. I'm Keilani Bonis-Ericksen, and I'm a spatial ecologist for Audubon California. Today I'm really excited to share with you all just a little overview of the geospatial program at Audubon California and some of the conservation teams and programs that we work with. Let's see if this works. Oh, I'll just use this. 1 second. Okay, there we go. Just a little bit about myself. I was born and raised in a small town called Waimanalo in Oahu, Hawaii, where I grew up loving the outdoors, anything ocean related, especially surfing. That's a picture of me at a break called Honoli'i on the Big Island. My love for the outdoors led me to pursue a degree in geology at Occidental College in Los Angeles. And I spent my weekends out in the Mojave Desert, mapping faults and synclines and formations. Basically, I was a geo nerd. And this is also where I took my first Geographic Information Systems class, or GIS. And GIS is a software that we use to make really cool maps and do spatial analysis. So after my undergraduate studies, I kind of took a break from the real world. I worked a little bit of a nomadic life as a kayak guide in San Juan Islands off the coast of Washington State, as you can see there, also in New Zealand and Hawaii, before I started figuring out what I actually wanted to do. And I got an opportunity to be a master's student at the Conservation Biology and Environmental Science program at the University of Hawaii, where I conducted research on three-dimensional models of coral reefs. So here's a picture of me doing scientific diving, monitoring the 2019 coral bleaching event, where I was diving all around Hawaii Island, tracking the bleaching of the coral. So really cool research, but also could be tragic in ways. So as I was looking for jobs when I finished my master's degree, as I was in my master's program, COVID happened, and so all of my work shifted to be remote. And one good thing to come out of that was I ended up doing a lot of mapping of the coral reefs, extracting 3D coral metrics, and I realized that I really loved using GIS. And so as I was finishing up my master's degree and looking for jobs, I was lucky enough to find this job with Audubon California, which integrated my love for using geospatial science and conservation. That's the story that led me to Audubon California, and if there's anyone here that is interested in any sort of GIS, I'm happy to answer any questions. So I've been lucky to work with folks all across the organization within California and outside of it. This is me and my supervisor, Dan. We're the geospatial team, and this is us ground truthing in the Salton Sea. The top right is a group of us GIS folks at the Esri User Conference in San Diego. With that, what does Audubon California do? As we all know, the National Audubon Society protects birds and the places they need today and tomorrow. What does our geospatial program do? We integrate science and technology into conservation teams. We use science and technology to advocate and educate, and we develop science and science products to directly inform on-the-ground conservation and restoration. We support local and national conservation programs, staff, centers, and sanctuaries by providing mapping services, statistical summary, grant narration, and also science advising. Again, we partner with conservation programs, staff, centers and sanctuaries, and external partners outside of California and the National Audubon Society across the state and region. by developing science products to inform on-the-ground conservation programs and efforts, resources management, and policy. So you're probably thinking, wow, this must be a huge team to do all of that work. But no, it's just us two. We are the geospatial team. As you can see, we take our work very seriously. And so we both have backgrounds in science. Dan has his background actually at CSUMB, where he studied marine science. And again, my background is in marine and environmental science. So while we specialize in geospatial science and work, we use our backgrounds in science to inform our day-to-day work. Our geospatial reach spans within California, but also the bordering states. And we're really lucky to partner with different teams like the Western Waters team, which is a team that focuses on work around the Colorado River region. And we also connect with and consult with people across the Western Hemisphere. And this is really important because, as you know, birds don't have political boundaries or borders, so our work shouldn't either. And as you can see, we have this large reach, and we have our hands in a lot of different pots. So I'm going to give some examples of conservation programs that we work with here in California. And those are the conservation ranching programs, the Working Lands program, and the Salton Sea program. And I'm also going to discuss national programs that we work with, including the Public Lands program and a project we did for the Public Lands program using GIS to inform California's 30 by 30 initiative. When looking just within California, our focus regions include the desert region, which is here in yellow, coastal areas shown in blue throughout the coastline, and the Central Valley, which is shown in green here, and the conservation ranching program, which are all of these yellow dots that are the ranches. So I just want to highlight a few of these conservation programs. As I said before, the conservation ranching program, which are the yellow circles, the Working Lands program, which is based in the Central Valley, and our Salton Sea program, which is a part of our desert program, shown here in yellowish orange. Next, I'm going to give an overview of each of these conservation programs and our role in these programs. So for our conservation ranching program, as some of you may know, grasslands are among the most at-risk ecosystems in the world. And as a result, grassland birds have declined more than any other bird species in the continent, and some as much as 80%. The majority of grassland birds breed on private lands. So working with private landowners and ranchers is our best hope for protecting these really important ecosystems. Audubon developed the Conservation Ranching Initiative, which is a market-based conservation approach which provides incentives for ranchers to implement grassland best practices. So the ranchers can use this label shown here, which is Audubon certified bird-friendly land. And so more consumers will buy this beef, and in return, the birds are thanking them because they're using best practices. Oh, might have froze. Let's see. Oh no, 1 second. My map is loading. So our geospatial team helped to create a prioritization combining a number of important variables like where protected land is, distance to slaughterhouses, focal bird species ranges, and many more different variables to display where priority areas to implement conservation ranches should be. Here on the map, the dark green areas are higher priority areas to implement the conservation ranching program, whereas in lighter green to white are lower priority areas. And then circles here are ranches that are currently a part of the conservation ranching program. And on top of that, we also help create soil and land cover maps for ranches that are in this program. We also work with the Working Lands program. This Working Lands program is based in the Central Valley, which is one of the most transformed landscapes in the state and country. It was once a mosaic of wetlands, woodlands, lakes, grasslands, and it's now the most important agricultural region in the country. It's worth $17 billion a year and produces 250 crops. On top of that, more transformation of this area is projected. This map here shows the projected development in 2100. And at a glance, these two maps look pretty similar. But if you look at this southern section, the development is projected to pretty significantly increase here. Now, these maps really show the importance of the Central Valley for migrating land birds and shorebirds. The map to the left here shows priority shorebird sites, which, as you can see, are clustered around the Central Valley, where we have millions of ducks and geese that come here and use the Central Valley wetlands. And this map here shows migrating land birds by the millions from the Delta to Tulare Basin here. And the cylinders represent number of migrating land birds per year. So we're talking 65 million land birds in the fall stop over in Tulare Basin. So pretty significant. Oh, whoops. Okay. So how can we help to protect species that use this region when pretty much the whole area is used by agriculture and is being developed? The Working Land programs partners with other nonprofits like the Nature Conservancy and Point Blue and collaborates with private landowners to expand migratory bird habitat through an incentive program in which landowners are given a certain amount of money per acre for keeping their fields flooded through the migratory seasons. So this could be for rice fields or duck hunting fields, whatever that purpose may be. The point is to expand wetland habitat during the migratory seasons, whether that's fall or spring. So for example, Audubon partnered with the Nature Conservancy to create over 3,000 acres of shorebird habitat during April and May on private wetlands in San Joaquin Valley, prolonging the flooding of these wetland fields. We also build prioritization, spatial models, and do machine learning to inform groundwater management in this area, and we create tools to inform policy and conservation. One second. It's frozen again, but more maps are loading. And lastly, one of the main programs I work with is the Salton Sea program. Who here has heard of the Salton Sea? Everyone. Okay, great. Have any of you guys been to the Salton Sea? A few of you? Okay, that's exciting. It's a pretty interesting landscape, isn't it? Yep. It's really pretty in my opinion, but very interesting. And did you all know that it is the largest lake in California? It's 35 miles long and 15 miles wide. So it's huge. And it's also one of the most important places for birds in North America. It's a critical nesting and breeding point for birds who migrate along the Pacific Flyway. But the Salton Sea is shrinking, which has caused detrimental effects to the environment, economy, and public health in surrounding communities. So basically, as the Salton Sea recedes, it exposes sediments or playa, and these sediments have chemicals, agricultural chemicals embedded in them. And so when these sediments are emitted, it can be really harmful to community members around the Salton Sea area. And also, as the Salton Sea recedes, the salinity increases, which is very harmful to fish populations that are a critical food source for migrating birds. And so we've seen decreases in fish-eating birds here at the Salton Sea. Our goal at the Salton Sea program is to ensure the protection and restoration of habitats at the Salton Sea for millions of migratory birds and the health of more than 650,000 community members through science, policy, and community engagement. This photo here is at Sonny Bono National Wildlife Refuge. Have any of you been there? Oh, cool. Yeah, it's a pretty great birding spot. And so this is a community group here being led by Frank Ruiz, our Salton Sea program director. Now, what does the geospatial program do at the Salton Sea? Well, we support science to inform resources management and policy making. So a recent study that we did was looking at emerging vegetation around the Salton Sea. For example, this map shows the vegetation along a shoreline section of the Salton Sea. The green represents vegetation that has been maintained from 2020 to 2022. And the yellow represents new vegetation since 2020, while the red represents, whoops, let me go back there. Oh no, 1 second. Sorry about that. It's frozen again.
There it is.
Oh no, sorry. Okay, there we go. So, press the wrong button. Okay, so the red here represents areas that are no longer vegetated, but all of this area is new vegetation, which is really important because a lot of habitat is being lost since the Salton Sea is retreating. So understanding areas where there is new vegetation popping up helps us to understand a dynamic, and we're hoping that maybe some of these birds will start using this emerging vegetation. And we did this analysis using satellite imagery. And the recent analysis that I just did showed that since 2020, there has been a 15% increase in vegetation. I kind of have to dive further into that, but it's a good sign. Another example of the work we do down at the Salton Sea is a study identifying areas most suitable for public access while incorporating local community input to inform current and future state projects at the Salton Sea. So for this project, first we conducted a community survey which spanned from Coachella down to Calexico, which is almost in Mexico. We interviewed 670 residents, and we found that community members really value public services and amenities such as picnic areas, nature viewing areas, and boat ramps. And this informed our spatial analysis, where we conducted 3 different analyses assessing suitability around the Salton Sea for picnic areas, nature viewing areas, and boat ramps. We combined variables variables that are important for public access, like proximity to roads to make it accessible, proximity to birding spots and vegetation. And so these are all combined into one model to display areas that are more or less suitable for implementing public and community access. So here we can see that green areas are more suitable for implementing access to surrounding communities, while red areas are less suitable. Change slides here. To better understand these results, we created an interactive map where you can select these data layers on and off. So for instance, darker blue represents areas that are more suitable for implementing community access. And you can also turn project boundaries on and off. And the intention is for this to be used for resources and resource managers and stakeholders for project planning around the Salton Sea. And in general, I just think it's a really great example of how GIS can be used to visualize data and information. You can also access this using the QR code here. So we've gone through some of our important conservation programs here in California. And lastly, I want to step into discussing some national programs that we work with, specifically the Public Lands Program, where we conducted an analysis informing California's 30 by 30 initiative. We developed a product for the National Public Lands team to better understand the convergence of California public lands and high priority conservation regions. This is being used to justify land management policy recommendations for California's 30 by 30 initiative. But first, what is California's 30 by 30 initiative? It was an executive order signed by Governor Newsom back in 2020, where California committed to the goal of conserving 30% of California's lands and waters by 2030. And how is the geospatial team helping to inform California's 30 by 30 initiative? Well, we're using hemispheric data developed by the National Science Team that integrates climate and migratory science to prioritize areas of high conservation importance for birds that would be really important to focus on in our work. Here, the dark blue areas represent top 10% conservation priority areas, and then the lighter shade of blue represents top 30% conservation priority areas. Specifically, we're leveraging this hemispheric-wide spatial data developed by the National Science Team and using it on a statewide level to inform policy and management. These are conservation priority areas just within California, and I zoomed in so you could see some very high priority conservation areas in Southern California, including the Mojave Desert area around here and the southern area of the Salton Sea here. For this analysis, what I did was extract the intersect of these high priority conservation areas and federally managed land in California. So in this map, the darker shades of blue represent top 10% conservation priority areas just within federally managed land, while medium shade is top 20%, and then the lighter shades of blue here represent top 30% conservation priority areas within federally managed land. And this graph shows the percent of federally managed land that contains high priority conservation areas. So the dark blue bar, as you can see here, represents the percent of, for example, Bureau of Land Management that contains top 10% land, and the lighter shades represent top percent of federally managed land that contain top 30% conservation priority areas. So, for example, the Bureau of Land Management contains 75% top 30% conservation priority areas, while the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation contains 20%, it gets confusing. 20% of U.S. Bureau of Reclamation land contains top 10%, which is the highest percent conservation priority areas. This is just really important to visualize and understand what types of federal agencies we want to be collaborating with and working with when informing the 30 by 30 initiative and which lands to be a part of that 30 by 30 initiative. Yes?
I'm a little confused by the graph. Wouldn't the top 30% include the top 10%?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
if so, then
exactly.
put it on the figure went away.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's a little bit lagging.
It shows the top 10% as separate from the top 30 on the graph.
So we wanted to separate them out just so you could have a better sense of the highest priority regions and then the top 30. But you're right, the top 30% does include that top 20 and top 10.
Okay. So in a way, the whole thing should be the
So all of this, yeah, is top 30%, but we also want to highlight the most important conservation regions. Okay. That's a really great question. It's lagging. Okay, I was also wondering what federal agencies manage the top 10% conservation priority regions. And here we can see that the top 10% priority areas up north near Eureka are managed by U.S. Forest Service and National Park Service land, while this high priority area around the Santa Barbara area is managed by U.S. Forest Service, Department of Defense, Bureau of Land Management, and National Park Service, while the Salton Sea region is managed mostly by Department of Defense and BLM, along with that Mojave Desert high priority region. And so I just really like this visualization because this map here shows the distribution of federally managed land. So the different colors represent these different federal agencies, while this map again represents the top conservation priority areas deemed by the National Audubon Society just within federally managed land. And I do want to state that this is important because federal land would be much easier to implement better management than, say, within private lands. And so they have high value for conservation. And I was also wondering what ecoregions of California make up these top 10% conservation priority areas. Let's see if this next slide loads. Okay. So again, these are our highest priority conservation regions and the ecoregions that make up these. And by the way, ecoregions are areas of similar climate and soil and landscapes. So here we have the coastal range, the Klamath Mountains, the Mojave Basin and Range, Sonoran Basin and Range around the Salton Sea, and the Central California foothills and coastal mountains around the Santa Barbara area. Now, assessing where the National Audubon Society prioritizes lands and where there are opportunities to bring lands into protection and count towards California's 30 by 30 goals is critical. This work informs the National Audubon Society's public lands team in California, where they, along with others, advocate for bills to improve public access and conservation areas. I hope that these implications give you all an idea of just how important geospatial science is here at Audubon California. I really love my job. I get to make cool maps for a living that allow people to visualize data so we can more easily meet Audubon's goals of protecting birds and their really important habitats. And it's been a pleasure sharing this with you all. And with that, if you all have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Yeah.
So looking forward, have you been able to integrate any climate modeling in with your critical areas to see what impacts the expected changes in the climate might bring about?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And actually the high priority conservation areas were developed using climate data. As you can see, one of the data inputs to this hemispheric-wide data are climate stronghold data. And so that is being used. And I think it'll continue to be used to inform policy and management and conservation for Audubon. Yes?
With 30 by 30 initiative, do you know what the current percentage is of land that's being protected?
Oh, that's such a great question. I would.
How far we have to go?
Yeah, I would love to know, and I'm gonna look that up. I don't know, but it would be a really good question, knowing how much work there is to do towards that goal. Yes.
I thought that your ecoregion map overlay with the conservation priority areas is really interesting, and I was wondering if you had looked into pulling, data from eBird or other sources to look at the actual the species composition of those ecoregions, and if you can pinpoint if there's particular flagship species within those priority areas that could would also be beneficial to that help to use that information to guide the protection even further.
Yeah, definitely, and that would be really cool to visualize on a map as well. These high priority conservation regions, another one of the data inputs are these full annual cycle priority areas, which includes eBird data and up-to-date migratory bird data throughout the year. So it has been included in this model, but it wasn't included in the visualizations, which would be really cool to do. Yeah.
Are you using just standard Esri technology, or is Audubon developing its own proprietary versions of GIS?
Yeah, no, we just use Esri products. I mostly work with ArcGIS Pro. I also use ArcGIS Online, where I made that web application that I showed you all. And so mostly use Esri products. Yeah.
Good talk. It makes me want to donate more money to Audubon.
Oh, well, that's great. Thank you. Thanks so much.
I was just going to ask or let you know there's a really cool GIS-based focused conservation organization called the Society for Conservation GIS.
Yes.
And they used to pre-COVID, hold their annual symposiums here at Asilomar. And that was always super fun. So if they start doing that again, hopefully you get like your little email updates.
Yes.
And stuff. That's just, across the bay here for you. Those are always really great. And it's the same kind of concept of using, integrating a lot of data from different sources, putting it on a map, getting everybody around it, saying which areas do we like best, like community users, like the picnic area kind of concept, and then it's just a really amazing tool for everybody to see what's going on from a larger scale.
Yes, definitely. It's such a cool society for conservation GIS, and I just started volunteering for them.
Wonderful, yeah.
And I actually presented my Salton Sea public access suitability work last month.
Oh, cool.
But I was bummed I didn't get. It was virtual, so
Yeah.
I didn't get to come to Monterey, unfortunately.
Question
Yeah.
regarding one of your early photographs in your talk was the coral reefs.
Yes.
Was
Yeah.
that on Hawaii?
Yep. It was on Hawaii
What
Island.
is the latest status there on coral reefs?
On coral reefs, well, it's not the best. There has been some coral restoration work, but the coral is declining through heating events, and it's definitely not getting better. Many places are integrating coral restoration, trying to regrow the coral, but that's honestly very costly, and it hasn't been in place for long enough to really know if there's going to be positive effects, if that's actually going to work. So as the climate crisis continues, the corals are just being drastically affected, and they're in decline, unfortunately. Yeah, there's not really positive news there, but actually some corals are adapting to. There are certain corals that are more resilient to heating events than others, and so what we're thinking is going to happen is just going to be a restructuring of coral compositions, where there's going to be some that are more dominant because they're able to withstand the heating events, withstand coral bleaching, while other species are just going to end up dwindling. So I don't think at all that it's hopeless for the coral reefs. I just think the structure of coral reefs is going to change, and they're going to adapt. I mean, they've been around forever, so.
One other question regarding that.
Yeah.
When you're doing your actual mapping, say of a coral reef like that,
Yeah.
how exactly are you doing it? Are you taking physical measurements of the depth that each point of land is and making like a topographic map from the points that you're getting, or is there a totally different method that you use?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And actually what we used in the lab I worked in, it was called structure from motion photogrammetry, which involves actually taking a series of photos of a coral plot, so say 500 photos, and then we use this program to stitch together those photos in a mosaic, and eventually through this process create three-dimensional models of coral reefs. Now you can take different slices of those models to create an orthomosaic, which is very high resolution imagery of the corals. And then from that, you can trace all of the corals. So what I did specifically for my research is I used data from one location during a time series events, so say 3 different years, and we looked at changes in individual corals I had a team of students helping me to very manual process of tracing corals from one year to the next, to really look at what are the smaller scale changes. So that's the sort of mapping I was doing, and I was also extracting 3D metrics of the reefs, because the 3D structure of the reef is really indicative of the health of the reef, because the more structure a reef has, the more biodiversity there is surrounding it, because there's more habitat for the fish. Anyways, you can extract 3D metrics like the 3D over 2D surface, and
That's
so.
my query really is, you're taking a two-dimensional picture.
Yes.
From that you're able to get depth.
Yes.
Using the program in the computer.
Yes.
That to me
Yes.
is just mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's really cool, and it's a really good way to. It's a really good indicator of how different coral reefs are doing, because if you have that imagery and you can extract 3D metrics, you can get a really good idea of how that habitat is doing in general. But that's a great question. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I think you've answered this already, but I couldn't figure out what the answer was because I just couldn't.
Yeah.
Are you using eBird data as a map and putting it on top of your other maps?
So the eBird data has been integrated into this model for the highest priority conservation regions that was developed by the National Science Team. I'm not using it in my work currently with my projects that I'm doing, but it has been integrated into this spatial data, which was the high priority conservation regions that I was showing you that range from dark blue to light blue. So eBird data has been integrated into that just because the priority conservation regions are for important places for birds. And that's going to inform our work at the National Audubon Society and our planning and strategy. Yeah.
I've got a question related to that. Just thinking about how many eBird checklists I submit and sightings, like that's a mega data set, the global eBird data set, even in North America, even in this Western Hemisphere. And that's just one layer of this massive like model you're putting together. So do you run all this stuff in ArcGIS on your laptop, or do you have like some server somewhere who does like the big ultimate computing? You press the button, it's like somewhere, some smoke's billowing out.
Yeah, that's a great question. For the priority conservation regions, I actually didn't develop those. That's the National Science Team. I think they're using a server. They should be, because if it's just on their personal computer, it'll probably crash. But for my work, I was extracting from that data, looking at the convergence with public lands, and I was just using my personal computer. And I do that for my analysis too, but luckily Audubon provides my computer, so.
Yeah. I guess that is still down to probably like just a 1 or a 0 or something on a map or something really a lot more simple than all the layers there. Yeah.
Definitely,
So
definitely.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm hoarse. Have we noticed the effect of the geothermal plants on the southern part of the Salton Sea?
That's a good question. I'm not too familiar with the effects of the geothermal plants. I know that there's lithium that's starting up there, the lithium mining fields, but no, I'm not too familiar with the geothermal plants there.
So how often is your data updated?
We try to keep up to date with most of our data every year, and like, for example, for our vegetation analysis, we want to continue looking at new vegetation around the Salton Sea every year just to see what is going on there. Good question.
One more about the Salton Sea. Is it mostly private landowners all around that?
Oh, that's such a great question. It's a checkerboard of different landowners, which made it quite a headache doing this analysis because I did incorporate land ownership. And there's federal, private, state owners. It's just everything mixed together, which is why it gets pretty complicated doing work down here. It's politically a headache. Yeah.
Sorry, another question. I didn't look too, it was a quick look at your
Working lands. Yeah.
Map, but it seemed like there was a little bit of a disconnect between where your program is actually implemented currently versus like the priority area, or like the sort of the priority branches that should be integrated into
that was a really
program.
good
So
catch.
is that disconnect, if it is true, because those branch lands haven't agreed to participate, or because they haven't been contacted yet, or because you're working on it, or?
Yeah, that's a really great question. The conservation ranching program is relatively new, so they're just trying to work with as many ranchers as possible. Another thing is the prioritization does need to be updated because that was a few years ago, and there's updates to some of the data, so we're thinking that could change. And really what the map does is inform where the conservation ranching team should approach more ranchers. So while all of those different, I can pull up the map, but while all of the ranches now don't exactly fit in those high priority areas, it's more so to inform where they should be collaborating with ranchers in the future. But for some, not all ranchers can be a part of this program. And so it really just depends if they can get one. Maybe it's not in a, maybe it's in a lower priority area, but if they're able to collaborate with a rancher, then that's a win. Yeah, that's a good question though.
What kind of incentives do they offer the ranchers?
Oh yeah, so it's a label. I'm not sure if there's other monetary incentives, but I do know that that label does mean a lot because more consumers will buy that beef with that bird-friendly label. And so that is a pretty huge incentive, but I don't know if there are other incentives. I can ask. That's a good question. Because I know with the Working Lands program, they are given a dollar amount per acre, and the landowners submit bids to be a part of this program with a dollar amount per field of wetland habitat. Yeah. But that's different from the conservation ranching program.
Super. Thanks so much, Keilani.
Thanks so much.